All right, Thomas, Denise, you are ready to, whenever you are ready.
Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to meet everyone. My name is Thomas Herndon, and I'm a managing member of a law firm where I deal with businesses every day, from the marriage side of business to the divorce to just about everything in between. So today, which I think is a really important issue, is we're talking about employment practice liability insurance. And as a business owner, it's kind of one of those insurances that doesn't really come up always often in people's mind when they first initially start a business. You automatically think of general liability. You always think about, if you're a professional, some type of professional licensing and insurance for that. But this is probably, I would consider, one of the most important insurances that you can have. So so I guess, let me jump into what is EPLI, or why is MPI important for small businesses. I'm gonna first start off with the topic of coverages, right? So what does it cover? It covers a wide range of things, from sexual harassment, obviously in this day and age, with employers and individuals, there've been really a high uptick in sexual harassment. Well, I don't even want to say high uptick. It's been there. It's just really becoming more in the news. And then clearly in an employment context, you have discrimination. Discrimination is what? Race, age, religion, and sexual orientation. So all those are wrapped up in the types of things that are covered in a policy. You also have something called wrongful termination. So obviously, when you have an employer, you're dealing with hiring, but sometimes you don't get the right person. You have to terminate them. How do you do that? What is the right way to do that? And part of this policy is to really protect you from having to delve into some of those costs. I'm going to briefly go through a few other types of coverages. Breach of employment contracts. Every employee has a contract. There's something called negligent evaluation. So when you have an employee that has to be evaluated, but there has to be you can't do it negligent, right? That goes for compensation as well too. The employees have to be compensated fairly. There has to be a system that's set in place. You have a few others which I can go into: wrongful discipline, failure to employ or promote, deprivation of career opportunities, emotional distress, invasion of privacy. But these are all different types of coverage areas that your employment policy can cover. And it's very important because a lot of these are different areas that all of us come up in our business, because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with hiring. I'm going to talk about some hot topics right now. I don't think you can have a conversation about employment without talking about COVID-19. so as far as COVID-19 is concerned, everybody is now starting to talk about vaccines, right? Whether you, as an employer, should direct that your employees take the vaccine versus not, right? I think in the news there was Rutgers University and maybe another university that said they're going to direct that, demand that their students have vaccines before entering campus. That's a really dicey issue, because you start delving into potential discrimination claims, how people are being treated when whether they have a vaccine or not. So as an employer, I know we've been advising our companies not to require it. That instead that they still keep up with the normal processes of keeping people safe, wearing masks and things like that. Now, the most interesting part is that the federal government has said you don't have to wear a mask, you know, in certain places, but in the local context, there's still some confusion there as far as what your obligations are. So as an employer, stay safe. You know, you go the safe route as opposed to not. Another hot topic, obviously, is sexual harassment. In this Me Too era, as well as you know, just the knowledge of all the different sexual harassment that's going on in the industry, in all different types of industry. We all need to be very careful and have processes as far as how to report sexual harassment. You have to, as an employer, you got to have someone that you appoint to do this, and do an investigation. There has to be a findings of investigation, and then there has to be some type of punishment. Also, sexual harassment doesn't only mean with regards to your employees. They also mean your clients as well. As an employer, if you are aware that one of your clients is sexually harassing one of your employees, you as an owner have a duty to stop it, or to you know, not have that client come around. So it's really expensive. It's really a serious issue. It's something that, you know, as an employer, you got to know. Another hot topic would be just dealing with the different types of issues of pronouns, and using the proper pronouns with regards to employees. You know, he, she, them. Part of being an employer, what you can do to normalize it is, what I've seen is people have in their signature block what pronouns they go by. And what it does is it forces everyone to basically figure out what you know, how to really to speak to someone. So that's important. So why, after all this, why is all this important? It really comes down to exposure and litigation. These types of cases are very expensive. In New York alone, I know the average of the billing rate for employment attorneys is like $4.15 an hour. And some of these cases can go for a very long time. You know, it's as a business, it can really cripple you and basically put you out of business. So having hard costs where you know what to expect is really really important. And then the fourth item that I wanted to touch on is potential covered costs. So you always have, there's certain costs that would be covered. For the attorney's fees, right? Attorneys are expensive, and the policy will cover that. Covers settlements and judgments as well, but there's an exclusion for punitive damages. So clearly, if you do something wrong, then that would not be covered. So that's generally those topics. You know, before we move on, I want to make sure, does anyone have any questions, or do you want me to explain something a little bit more before I move on to the requirements and process?
So Thomas, someone put a question in the chat just asking just a breakdown of what the insurance is. And I think you touched on it when you talked about coverage, but just how this as an insurance would actually assist the employer. I believe that's what she's getting at.
Yeah, okay, yeah, definitely. It's a way you're going to have relationships with your employees, right? And that relationship, you sometimes have amazing employees and you have nothing that goes wrong. There's some employees that just don't work out, and you have to fire them or do something else. This is basically a way to cover you for those different types of issues that pop up, whether it be someone's discriminating against one of your employees or something like that. So the idea is that as a business, you want to basically determine what your costs are. You know, the more that I can determine what my costs are, then I can just plan better for it. So that's why if something were to happen, at least you know you're paying a premium for your employment insurance, and that if something, God forbid, something does come up, then you can rely on that. So that's what I would say for that. Anything else before I move on?
And everyone, if you have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. You can raise, if you if you know where the raise your hand function is, or if you want to unmute yourself. So during the course of this time, we'll stop for questions over the course of this presentation. So if you have any questions in a moment and you want to unmute yourself, feel free
Yes,
before we move on.
and it's fine. You can interrupt me too as well. I'm fine.
Okay, so Patrice has a question.
Yes.
Okay, so as far as the small business is concerned, you're saying that we need workers' comp to cover workers' comp. We need small business to cover the business if there's a tragedy and we have to go out of business. And we need EPLI in addition to protect us from the employees that we have in case they come at the small business owner with each of those hot topic type issues.
Yeah,
So basically, we need to carry general insurance, workers' comp insurance, business protection insurance, and then EPLI, which is protection from the employee insurance.
Yeah, you got, yeah. I mean, I own my own firm, and I basically had set up everything. So we have their GL, which
I'm just asking to make sure
Yep.
I'm understanding what you're saying. Is that
Yep.
like 5 different insurances we should have
yeah,
to cover ourselves?
yeah, it'd be general liability. With the general liability, usually the business interruption. Well, you can have a separate business interruption, but sometimes it's included in the GL policy too as well. Workers' comp, you can have your separate policy, or it can be done through payroll, because the policy you're doing estimated payments, but you can also do the payroll. Then some people, if you're a professional, you have professional liability coverage. Like for lawyers, we have malpractice coverage. And I think at least in New York City, there's New York Family Leave. There's like a whole policy for that. So yeah, I mean, as a business, you're right. Yeah, yeah, you have to carry 4 policies, you know, that goes into your bottom line. But you get dinged with one of these, it can hurt, and especially, I know I flagged yours because you're the transportation industry. You're really highly regulated by the feds and the state.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, how many?
Yeah, I know.
So you said under general liability that'll cover like the business loss or whatever goes under general. Okay, so it's not a separate one.
Yeah, it can be a separate one, but usually it's covered in your general liability. I know ours is, but yeah, you just have to you can have someone take a look at your policy and do like a coverage analysis. That's something that we do all the time for our clients too as well. Just to basically take a look at your policy, see what it includes, and then so you can know what to expect. But definitely with the transportation industry, because I've represented a lot of the rideshare companies, a lot of the bus companies. Atlantic Express was one of our clients, and Coach USA. So I'm really familiar with this transportation industry and how that works. But yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Wow. So basically, we need 4 to 5 insurances plus a lawyer on tap to protect us. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure, because like I said, I'm rebuilding. I want to make sure I do it right this time. That's all.
Yeah, but the thing is that, look, you're a business owner, and you have to think about what is most important, right? And there's going to be, you can't get, if you have all these 17 different policies, then at some point maybe you're not able to run your business right? So there's going to be some risk involved. It's a matter of what your business is, and where, like, if you had a business where you didn't have any employees, then not having the EPLI is okay, right? Because then you're not, but if you're a company that's employee driven, then yeah, it's
no choice.
Yeah, and especially in the transportation industry, drivers, bus drivers, employment wage and hour issues come up. All those things, how you pay them, and things like that come up really regularly, from my experience.
Okay,
Thank you.
We have a comment, and then I'll put the question. Someone said, great info being shared. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Understood. And I always tell people, even when you talk about insurance, you have some things that are mandatory for your state, depending on what state you're in. And then you have some things that are not mandatory, but we still say, hey, it still could be mandatory, right? So it's one of those things that really being very much aware of how your business is run. and then think of all the potential liability that can come about. Some of those things will be mandatory that you have to have them. And then some things you may be additional, but if you start to think, okay, I probably need this, like Thomas said, if you're employee driven, that really, I think these are one of those things you probably would want to consider. All
Yeah.
right, so the
Okay.
next question is there a different insurance when working with food?
Different insurance when working with food. Not to my knowledge. I know I have dealt with food companies in the past, and what we did was, I mean, it's kind of a hard. I would have to look at, find out, because I know the FDA has certain rules. Like we had a situation where a company had listeria, and that drove like a whole entire different investigation. So there are certain circumstances with regards to food driven matters, but I'm not sure about the policies. That I would have to think about. Yeah, the policies as far as how they protect, like if someone gets sick or ill, how they would work that. I'm not familiar with one off the top of my head. Okay, so let me just move on to the requirements and process portion of it. So, we as a business owner, or let's say you decided that you want an EPLI insurance. So the idea is, generally you go to a broker, someone that someone you already having probably other types of insurance. You go to them and tell them what else you want. And then there's the application process where they get general information about yourself, your company, what you do. There's a portion about financials in that. And what they're looking for is that you have a viable business, and that they're trying to gauge risk. After that, there's you look at the prior insurance. They're looking, when we ask questions about that, is about whether you have prior insurance at EPLI, how many claims are made, things of that nature. Again, it's a risk-driven analysis. Now, within this requirement process, they have certain other types that sometimes are that piggyback off of the EPLI. These are like your director and officer of fiduciary duties types of portions of the application. And obviously, as a director and an officer, you have certain fiduciary duties that others don't have. Once the application is complete, send it to your broker, then it goes for underwriting. And underwriters are, I don't know, these people in this room that are just trying to figure out anything and everything, the ways to save money and to limit risk. So, I always say just get ready for all the different questions that you didn't think you were going to have to answer, or to get information for them, because again, part of their job is to really try to determine the risk, and so they can determine the proper premium for your business. And then after that, you get the policy, and once you get the policy, you read it. I always say it's always good to go maybe speak to your attorney or to your broker, and to really figure out what's in your policy, because every single year you should go through an annual a review to see if anything needs to change, because your business changes, right? And I feel that it's always a good idea to do that yearly. So I'll leave it open for a few questions and before I hand it over.
Okay, so someone asked, is credit checked during the insurance application process?
Yes. Yes, everyone will, whether you're trying to get capital or whether you're trying to, get insurance, they want to look at the viability of the owners as well as the company. So that's always on in the process. Yeah. So actually, and then even take a step further, I think part of of starting your business and getting involved with people is knowing, whether they're, financially capable to work together, because that your business will go through ups and downs. You might need capital, you might need financing. All those things are very important things to think about.
Okay, so this question was directed to Sophie, but I'll ask it generally. Is there a database that shows how much certain businesses pay annually? And I'm going to assume that's for various types of insurance, but not just EPLI.
Yes.
Okay.
I can kind of tell you just rough numbers. I'm trying to think if I can. God, I used to have these things, my numbers in my head now. I don't want to say one way or the other, because I know EPLI has been going up a little bit due to COVID. So exact numbers I'm a little bit fuzzy on, but when you're talking to your broker, part of it, what I think is actually going through that and then trying to figure out again, what do I need? And then looking at it and figuring out whether you need to take, maybe you don't need as much, maybe you don't need $1 million policy, maybe you need 500. It's really a really intense discussion with your broker and your people to see what your actual needs are.
Yeah, and I was going to add, because just sitting in some of our insurance classes, it usually, when you said broker, Thomas, my head, I did like the bobblehead, because essentially a lot of times your broker, if you go to a broker instead of an actual one company, they can shop around for you. But it is really in your best interest to know what you're looking for and what you may need. So that's why that previous conversation of thinking how you would operate your business, even when it's fully operational, because a lot of small businesses don't think about that. What would it look like to be fully operational? And then address that. And then say, okay, based on that, these are the things that I would need. And we've had like insurance checklists that some businesses have given us, or some instructors have given us. So a lot of times it's knowing what you need, because they're going to ask you the questions and you just have to be prepared to answer them based on your need.
Yep.
I think that was all the questions. Let me see. I believe that was all the questions for the moment.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'll pass it along now.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Denise Smith. And we're going to talk about the other part of EPLI. So we know EPLI will protect you from any kind of claims that an employee may have against you, as Thomas said, due to discrimination or unfair work environment or any type of harassment. That really is the purpose of it. But in order to actually complete the application, as Thomas alluded to, there's like 8 key areas that you are going to have to answer. One is the number of employees you have, your revenue, the industry you're in, the risk profile, past claims history, if there are any. And then the other 3 are the ones that we're going to focus on now. And these are the ones that are really HR related. They are hiring practices and termination practices, as well as employee turnover rate. So in regards to hiring practices, you always want to create with any practice you have with the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind, and making sure that your practices are free from discrimination. When it comes to job descriptions and interviews, again, you need to know what you should and should not be have stated on an application, or what you should not be asking during an interview. For example, in the state of New Jersey, as of 2020, you can no longer ask about a person's previous wages. That is not allowed to be asked anymore. And that's pretty much for the New York metro area. So you want to be mindful of things like that when you're going through the interview process. The next big thing is handbooks, which are the first line of defense for employers, setting forth the company's rules and procedures, and can be utilized to justify termination decisions. Now, we're not advocating termination, as Thomas said, but you do need to make sure that you have clearly communicated to your employees what your expectations are in regards to their roles and responsibilities. The handbook is going to come into play when termination decisions are challenged, either through the state of unemployment system or discrimination charge with the EEOC, or just a simple lawsuit, which is why EPLI will protect you from these key areas. One thing that you need to make sure of when you're using or when you create your handbook is to make sure that the employees sign an acknowledgement. Many times there have been cases where an employee has gone to court and the employer said, well, I gave you the handbook, but there was never a signed acknowledgement. So you always want to make sure that you have a signed acknowledgement. The next thing is to make sure in your hiring process is that you conduct the background check on all hires, all hires. One more step in the due diligence of your hiring process to protect your business from potential risks. Next is onboarding, which is a one-day event, and it should communicate your expectations outlined in your handbook. And in contrast, orientation is ongoing and can last several months depending on the role. Many times people confuse onboarding and orientation and they think they're one and the same, but they're actually not. You can do a lot with your business if you have a very robust onboarding process as well as a good orientation. So you hire someone new and you want to get them acclimated to the way you want that role to perform. And so that's where the orientation process comes into play. And then we go into the termination practices. You don't hire employees to term them. However, terminations can be perceived as discriminatory or cause a lawsuit without a performance management process. So if you have an insurance company who's going to provide you with employment practice liability insurance, and they're looking at these key areas, you want to make sure that these areas for you are very tight and you have a process that you can develop, that you can speak to rather quickly. You want to develop, document, and communicate all performance assessments, both positive and negative. And I know as small business owners, sometimes, you don't want to have those hard conversations. But in order to protect your business, you need to develop a process so that you can have the hard conversations. Even if you have to bring someone else in order to have that conversation on your behalf, but you still have to have the developed documents and the communications in advance of these conversations. The next big thing is training your managers. So you need to train yourself. You need to train your managers or anyone who is supervising any of your employees to make sure that they can handle an involuntary termination discreetly and with respect. And I will say, I've gone through this many a times. Never belittle or humiliate a terminating employee, and always communicate any type of negativity privately, right? One other thing that you can do for yourself in order to protect the organization or protect your business is exit interviews. And conduct them regularly. When someone hands you a resignation voluntarily, you want to have a conversation with them and find out what what happened? Why are they leaving? Many people leave jobs because of bad managers. Investigate and then correct any irregularities, especially if you're hearing things through the grapevine. Water coolers, virtual or not, they are still good tells as to the culture and what people are thinking about your business. Supervisor and business owners should be trained on all policies and laws. Like Thomas mentioned, sexual harassment and unlawful workplace harassment. Online training is available in most states. You can obtain this training through the state websites, but this also protects you so that you can say that, yes, my employees were trained on this matter. Will it stop any harassment? It may not, but at least you have done your due diligence in making sure that people understand what they should and should not do. It also brings a level of awareness of if someone's having a conversation and you think that conversation might be sexually charged, you'll have a resource to say, okay, this is what sexual harassment is looking like, and you need to have a conversation with those employees. Next slide, please. So employee turnover rate, this is the final piece. This is a key HR management metric. It is the measured replacement of an employee with a new employee based on a specific period, either monthly or annually. So again, your insurance provider is looking for your employee turnover rate. And what this says to me is that they want to know how you treat your employees. Because if your employee turnover rate tends to be high and you're not in an industry where turnover rates are high, then they may feel that there's a greater risk. So employees may leave voluntarily, involuntarily, or for other life events. The average turnover rate is between 12% to 20%, which measures the health of the business. So note that in 2019, the overall US employee turnover rate was 44%. Contrast that to 2020, and during COVID, it was a whopping 57.3%. We know that's high because of COVID, but even 44% is relatively high based on the average turnover rate for the US. So how do you calculate it? It's a simple formula. The number of employees divided by the number of employees, the average number of employees times 100. So depending on your industry, so if you're like in retail or hospitality, for example, you can expect high turnover. Your goal is not to meet these numbers, however. High turnover can be tied to poor hiring decisions, low morale, and bad management. High turnover can be costly in two ways. The cost of time to hire. So someone leaves and now you have to either pay overtime to replace that shift, or you just don't have anyone to work that shift, so you're losing on productivity. And the second way is your state unemployment experience rating. And this is another tax that you'll pay as an employer based on the number of employees you have. For instance, within the tri-states, you'll find varying degrees for new business experience ratings, or what's known as SUI tax. New Jersey, for new businesses, is 2.8%. In Pennsylvania, it's 3.6%. And in New York, it is a whopping 4.02%. So that's significant. Next slide, please. So in closing, as you begin the hiring process, here are 9 topics you want to cover with your HR professional before you hire your first employee. So let me say that again. Here are 9 topics you want to cover with your HR professional before you hire your first employee. We've already talked about workers' comp. This is the insurance providing wage replacement and medical benefits to employees injured in the course of employment in exchange for mandatory relinquishment of the employee's right to sue his or her employer for a tort of negligence. So basically, if I slip and fall at work and I accept the workers' comp, then I am saying that I'm not going to sue my employer because I fell, even if the employer was negligent. Compliant applications, that is critical. It's used to determine the best qualified person for the job, and make sure that your applications are compliant with the state that you are hiring in, right? We live on bordering states. We live in a state where you could have an employee who lives in Pennsylvania, but actually works in New Jersey, or you can have an employee who works in New York and actually lives in New Jersey. So you always want to make sure that your applications are compliant with the state of that the employee is residing in, or where they're going to work in. Actually, I'm sorry, it's where they're going to work. One other crucial piece is the I-9 process, and it's used to verify the identity and legal authorization to work of all paid employees in the US. Now, this is one thing that none of these you want to skip on, but the I-9 process is definitely not one that you want to skip on. The next one is payroll. We've talked about payroll. You know that typically that's with a third party who will compile all applicable federal, state, and local taxes, city taxes based on payroll laws. Employee record files, documents required by law to be retained for all employees in a secure location with limited access. In a secure location with limited access. So these employee records should not be kept in your desk. They really, in this day and age, and in 2021, they really should be kept in the cloud, on a digital database. You can have a technical solution for it, especially if your employees are working out in the field. But you want to make sure that limited access is to those records, and you want to make sure that you're only maintaining the items that are required. For instance, you never want to save anything that has someone's social security number on it in their employee file. Leave process. So depending on the number of employees, you must comply with all state and federal leaves, such as sick leave. For instance, in New Jersey, employees are allowed to accrue sick leave, and they're allowed to carry it over. So you want to make sure that you comply with that sick leave policy that is mandated by the state. And then labor posters. This is a big deal, right? So federal and states require postings of labor laws. The most common one that you might think of right now, might come to mind, is the one about minimum wage. Due to COVID, as of 2021, many of these posters are now electronic. So you can download the posters that are required by the state, and you can post them in a secure site, or if you have an employee site, an employee website, you can post them there. And this one, Osha. So someone was talking about restaurant owners, and Osha is really a big deal for people in the food industry. So occupational safety should always be top of mind, but we know that COVID has intensified the need to keep workers safe. And I think Thomas mentioned that, during this COVID period, OSHA is requiring for you to have a designated person for safety. So you really want to make sure that you have that as well. And that person would be responsible for staying abreast of the latest requirements, which are changing almost daily. And then finally, there is training. And again, we talked about this, but it's critical to your business to train your supervisors, managers, and the business owners for knowing the policies and procedures that are governed by your business and the state and local employment laws. Additionally, make sure that your management team is trained on the requirements like sexual harassment, what it is, how to identify it, and all your policies and procedures can be found in your handbook. So that is the ending of our presentation. Any questions? Thank you. No questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So as a freelance editor, I don't currently have a staff. I could in the future. However, the main thing that attracted me to this session is the fact that when I'm dealing with other people's books, they are always extremely concerned about safety. They don't want me to lose their work. They don't want me to share their ideas. There's a lot of confidentiality. I contract artists to do illustrations so they could steal an idea or compete with me. So I was worried about insurance because if I lose someone's manuscript or get accused of copying something I didn't copy, I wanted the protection. Is there an insurance that would help in that situation? Would that be general liability?
Thomas, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, because this has popped up, I can take this along with the restaurant one. What I can say for certain is that there are certain insurance companies that write certain types of policies all the time, right? So like for example, I know Mount Holly always they write a lot of construction liability policies. So there probably is an insurance company that focuses on like just restaurants or just and have a really big portion that deals with freelancers. So that I can actually what I will do is I'll search around and see who that is, and then I'll send you guys a note of who to look for. Now, in particular, with regards to your question regarding your the freelancing issue, like in most cases when you're dealing with something like that, you have your NDAs, and so that usually will cover you, and it's really about making sure that the contracts are drafted tightly so that they protect you, and then you can have certain things where it's like indemnification provisions within the contract, so that I would think that's more of a contractual fix as opposed to an insurance fix.
Okay, thanks.
I have a quick follow-up question regarding NDAs. So I always hear a lot of times people will talk about it being able to be enforced depending on state, things of that nature. So how does that process work? Because you can have an ironclad contract, right, or NDA and have someone sign, but how does that work with regards to just enforcing it? And does that become different from state to state?
It does. I mean, you have NDAs it's governed by be governed by a contractual law, so that would be of the state. So yeah, it would go by state to state, and then if you're contracting interstate, then you would have federal jurisdiction, which would apply the law where the breach occurred. So they would have jurisdiction that way. So, but yeah, but for the most part, look, contract law is pretty straight. It's always the same. You look at the contract. It's what are those true meanings and things like that. And the law is pretty. Most of the time, in most jurisdiction, like a breach is a breach. So it's pretty common. They're the same in most states.
Thank you. All right, Melissa.
I have a question about like if you're, let's say you not necessarily have employees, but you're like subcontracting work out to, you know what I mean, and to like a freelancer or something like that. Like, is this type of insurance the employee insurance somehow, or is there a different type of insurance that you would have just in case, they try to, I guess maybe they say you sexually harass them or something like that. Like, is it the exact same type of insurance because they're not directly your employee? They kind of like their own employee or employer or whatever, but they're not yours. So how do you cover people like that?
That's a good question.
It is.
And what I would say is that in some insurance policies, you can add additional insureds, right? So I'm not sure if a policy they would permit like a in the EPLI policy, would they permit a someone who's not an employee, but there could be a situation where someone's an additional insured under the policy, and they could be added, be included in your policy. So that, again, that would be another discussion you would have with your broker, right? To see what type of policies there are out there. That's usually what happens. Like, for example, I can give an example like construction. You have someone who's a general contractor, they have subcontractors. Mm-hmm. So they add the subcontractors as additional insureds under their policy. So I could foresee something like that in the employment realm too as well.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry.
Let me just touch on that as well. I know that a lot of small business owners use the consultant as a strategy for resources, and that's fine. But they're not employees, right? So they should be providing you with statements of work and the things that you need in order to have and establish this relationship with them. Additionally, I just saw a statement come up in the chat. Contractors are not employees, and we don't want to mix those words because that can really cause a problem. So if you have a true contractor who is a 1099 that you're paying through a 1099, then you don't have the control over them that you would have over an employee. So we don't want to mix those two words. But you getting the sexual harassment training, you having the training, asking them if they have it as part of their business, right? So that everybody's on the same page, because you can still have sexual harassment training as a business owner, and they're considered a business owner because they are contracting with you. So they're not an employee to you, which means that they could have that sexual harassment training. And if you want to do business with them, you can make that part of the requirement, that they have the training in order to protect everybody.
Okay. And if you have kind of more like a service-based type business, like, what type of, I guess like the general insurance and all that will be like, right now I'm not going to have employees, but I am going to start with like maybe the 1099 employees and stuff, not employees, I'm sorry, 1099 contractors. But as far as like for my business itself, like since we do websites and stuff like that, like what insurance, let's say if there's an issue with a customer and they wasn't pleased with the work or something like that, like, what type of insurance would actually protect my company?
Thomas, that's E&O, right?
Yeah.
So that would be errors and admissions.
Errors and D&O is directors and officers, and then
right.
And then you also have on your GL side, if you have like cyber stuff, that would be covered in the cyber issues with like dealing with cyber insurance too as well. So yeah.
And the other thing, Melissa, is that you talked about safety and security, and you want to make sure, I know your clients are sending you information, and if you had a crash, what would happen to their precious information, right? So you want to make sure that you have the best security on your network, on your personal network. And you also fall under intellectual property, right? Because a lot of that has to do with you're creating things. Yeah. Right. And you're providing it to the client. So also intellectual property. Thomas, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just saying, I mean, I was on a panel for cyber insurance. So there's someone that I know that does that, and that does the policy side of doing that. But I could definitely see those policies that we just mentioned being applicable and coming up.
Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Just wanted to briefly add, and I know, thank you, Denise, for really, saying that there is such a distinction between the 1099 independent contractor and the W-2 employee. And then this came up in our 9-week class, because this is something that, people tend to ask about, but, they need to show you proof of their insurance, because let's say the state of New Jersey says, you misclassified this employee. You misclassified this employee as a 1099. You even though you trained them, so you would need to insure them, and they didn't come with their own insurance. So, you could classify someone as the 1099, but if they're misclassified, you're still liable.
Yes.
For
Yes.
all of the, withholdings and, insuring them. So just another reason just to really, really know the difference, and a distinction is so huge.
Absolutely, Sophie. That is so important. And a lot of people don't realize. I had a client who, said, oh, well, I have all of these contractors, but they've never given me a statement of work. They've never given me a W-9. They didn't do all the steps that a contractor will technically do. And these are the steps that should be done. So if you are considering doing a contract, having contractors, you really want to make sure you understand what that means, what you can and cannot do, because the Fair Labor Standards Act will look at you as saying you're just trying to avoid paying taxes, and you don't want that to happen, because then once they track you under your EIN, then they're going to hound you. So you want to make sure that you do it right the first time, and it's not that hard. You just make sure that you have people who have the right to work as 1099.
All right, so I have a question from the chat. As a nonprofit who relies on volunteers with and without professional licenses, is it necessary for me to have professional insurance or additional coverage under my general liability policy?
I would say I would take a look at that. Yeah, because you're there, because again, there's a difference between employees and volunteers, and they're not employees. So I would, that would be something that you probably, again, have that discussion with your broker, because the part of the broker's job is to kind of give you a rundown of all the different potential policies that are out there that might be applicable to your business, right? And what you kind of need. And then I would say the attorney's role is to, once you get your policy, to take a look at your policy and to see if it matches what you thought you were going to get. Okay, so, and because sometimes you can have a conversation, you can think you're getting something and you're not getting what you're getting. So, and then, because they can tell you, I had a situation where I had a client, actually it wasn't a client, it was someone who just asked me as a favor, take a look at the policy. I looked at the policy for us, and he was like, I'm doing this job, and I'm going, I'm on the roof, and we're building this nice whirlpool on the roof. And so I look at his policy, and it said there was an exclusion for any work outside over like 8 feet or something like that, right? And so then I call him up and I say, well, I know you said something about a project on the roof. This is an exclusion. So that's what I say. It's always good to at least talk to your broker, figure out like the different things out there, and then after that, run it by your attorney, just to make sure that you're protected.
Hi, welcome, April.
Any other questions?
So just as we close, I just want to let everybody know that as being on this call, or even as members of LIDA, HR the Partner is offering a complimentary HR consultation that will help you get things in order if you're not at the point of employees, but also helping you prepare for it. So as Sophie mentioned about the business plan changes, it comes and goes, and you add these and you take away. Well, you need to keep HR in that mix as well. And these slides are going to be helpful for you to kind of stir conversations. So it is, that option is out there for you.
Well, thank you, Denise. I was surprised. So I thank you personally. And I'm sure everyone on this call I'm hoping is excited as I was in that moment. So any additional questions? So I see some thank yous coming through. So that's a
You're
wonderful
welcome.
thing. So Sophie, can you just hit that stop share for me? Okay, thank you. Any additional questions, anyone? Okay. So if you have any additional questions, we'll definitely make sure we give them to Thomas and Denise. So I hear phenomenal presentation with lots of hand claps. I have to say the same.
Applause, 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 applause to Thomas.
Yes.
Jamila, can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, once again, y'all, this was an amazing